to From the Sickbed, a podcast on all things disability, queerness, and more. I'm Sun.
And I'm Lavender. And from our sick beds to yours, we welcome you to join us and get comfy as you listen in. For today's episode, we are going to continue talking about disability and shame and expanding on the topic from our last episode. We wanted to get into some more systemic sources of shame in regards to disability and talk about the ways that ableism is a driver for shame and just talk about those societal forces and norms that contribute to those feelings of shame in disabled people. And yeah, so we're going to start unpacking a little bit. This is a really, really meaty topic, but
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
yeah.
We'll see what we get through. So do you want to start with the euphemisms?
Yeah, when we were thinking about how to kind of structure this episode, in the last episode, we talked about what the feeling of shame is itself, and we talked about it more personally. But for this one, we instantly went to the euphemisms for the word disabled itself and thinking about how even the word disabled carries a lot of shame with it, in that non-disabled people and even some disabled people really are so uncomfortable with it, they can't even say the word. And all of these different euphemisms for the word disabled are a part of that avoidance and the way that people inherently tie shame to disability. So yeah, we wanted to just kind of talk about the ridiculousness of that and what some of them are.
Yeah. I feel like this is a good example of how shame, or like how disability is shamed, because even if, some people may not see what we see as disabled people, like they don't see the things that we go through, but I feel like the euphemisms that are used to avoid saying the word disabled, like they're pretty well known. They're widely used and people are familiar with like tripping over themselves trying not to say the word disabled, or like,
Yeah.
you know, trying not to be offensive but then end up being offensive. So yeah, I feel like it's something that I don't know, should be easy to like understand,
Yeah, it's so pervasive and so common, these euphemisms and alternative ways to say disabled, that I think it does give a very easy place for people to latch onto and realize like, oh, I've said that before, or
Yeah.
I know people who say that. And I think it is a small but very tangible way to see just how much people avoid anything around being disabled or disability in general.
Yeah. So I was trying to think of as many euphemisms as I could that I'm familiar with. But I think there's like only a little, like a handful that I think are the most, like, I don't know, popular or like, commonly used, at least that I've heard, which are differently abled. So I hate that one.
Yeah.
Handicapped and special needs. Those are like the main three that I could think of.
Yeah.
Did you think of anything different than that?
I've heard of some other ones, and one of them is person of ability.
What?
Yes. Which makes no sense.
Wait, what? That makes no sense.
I have heard this as I think I saw another disabled person say that someone tried to say this. So yeah, they tried to say person of ability. And then more disability specific ones, the way that people will say autism is a superpower or things like that. And sometimes this is a little more of a gray area because it's still a valid term, but people misuse it, is that people will, for example, say neurodivergent when they mean autistic
Mm,
because it is the less like
they don't want to say autistic.
they don't want to say autistic. It's the less stigmatized word.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you're just avoiding saying autistic by saying neurodivergent. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's an umbrella term.
right.
So like you're saying neurodivergent, but like what does that even mean in this situation?
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially when you are really only talking about one specific
Yeah.
disability like autism or any other disability that would fall under neurodivergence. Like and you're just saying neurodivergent, it's just been so diluted. Like it has kind of become a euphemism in itself to not like name those more stigmatized disabilities that
Yeah.
fall under that umbrella. Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely seen that happen more. Um I feel like ironically, like as more people are being open and sharing about their experiences with autism, ADHD, like other neurodivergences, I feel like it's becoming, I don't know how to explain it. It's like more people are talking about it, like learning about it, but then at the same time there's more people wanting to like gloss over it or not like look at it too closely or say specific terms, which is like, yeah, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know exactly. I think the way that I like to think of that phenomena is that linguistically, there has been a huge rise in the knowledge of neurodiversity affirming language and a lot of more people identifying as neurodivergent, right? But that doesn't mean these people have done the work to actually understand the politic around that and to kind of think about that personally in a radicalized way where they've undone a lot of the stigma of some of these more just stigmatize, psychiatric
Yeah.
disabilities or neurodivergencies or disabilities, whatever you want to call them, uh, that they haven't actually really sat with it in an anti-ableist way where they are fully comfortable naming things as they are. And there is still, to some level, some avoidance around
Hmm.
saying those words that they know will probably be not received well by others.
Yeah. So when I was thinking of all these different euphemisms, I was thinking of like why people use them
Mm.
and how it's so, oh my god, I know there's like a phrase to describe what I'm thinking. It's like when you do something and it has the opposite effect of what you were going for. Is there a phrase for that or a term
Oxymo-
for that?
Oxymoron or hypocritical or like
No. Oh,
ironic.
I don't know what it is. Yeah, I guess ironic would be the closest thing. I don't know what other word I'm
Hmm.
thinking of. But yeah, it is ironic because I feel like,
Paradoxical. It's a
yeah,
paradoxical relationship.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because when people use them, their intention is to, like, you know, say someone's disabled in a nicer way, quote unquote, nicer
Hmm.
way. Um, their intention is like, oh, I don't want to make this person feel uncomfortable or whatever. I want to use the right terms. But then they end up using terms that are not nice. They're actually like offensive and paternalistic. And yeah, I was just thinking about that. And I was like, it's so weird, like that so many people do that and don't realize that they're having the opposite effect of what they're going for.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. In their avoidance of the word disabled, they're just making it more awkward and apparent.
Hmm.
And I think really it's partially because they see disability as bad. They see disability as negative, right? Inherently. And so in their mind, they are trying to make the person more comfortable by not using that word, but really it's their own discomfort and
Yeah.
inability to just accept disability for what it is that
Mm-hmm.
is the reason for using these other terms. And then, yeah, like you said, when they do use it, it really only has the effect of making the person feel worse. Like I was recently called handicapped.
Mm.
My landlord, I was trying to get them to move the dumpster out of my access aisle in my parking space at my apartment. And in the email exchange about this, which they haven't done, by the way, so already there's an access barrier. And then I was forwarded an email in this chain where they were talking about me. Um, and the property manager was like, yeah, our handicapped tenant
Oh my
says this
God.
is in the way and needs it moved. And I just replied all like so like petty, but I did it in a nice way. I was just like, by the way, handicapped is outdated terminology and you can just call me the disabled tenant, not handicapped.
I love that. Did they
And
respond?
no response.
Oh,
I just put
of
him on
course.
blast, like reply all, so everyone sees it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this guy is not old either. He's young too. And he's can't just say I'm disabled. He didn't even say person with our tenant with a disability. He said handicapped tenant.
Mm-hmm.
It's you're right that it has the effect of just like making the disabled feel person feel more like stigmatized, more
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
More of an more othered.
More othered. Yeah, it's definitely more
Yeah.
othering. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
special needs is, I think, one of the worst.
Yeah. It's so like it's so patronizing. It's
Hmm.
like I'm not 3. You don't need to call me special to like make me feel like it's weird. I've never liked that term. Um,
Hmm.
I think if I'm not mistaken, I think it's slowly coming out of like oh my god, what's the word?
Out of fashion, out of use.
Yes, but also like academically, like in a lot of schools, that's been the go-to term for
Hmm.
disabled kids. Like, oh, they're the special needs class or whatever. And I feel like I've seen instances of like that being phased out and they're like, you know, finding different ways to call those group classes or whatever. But
Hmm.
yeah, that's been the heavy hitter for a while and it sucks.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is slowly changing and becoming less common, but keyword slowly because it is
Yeah,
still
very
used.
slowly.
A lot of places still use that term. They still use that term for their special ed programs. I mean, they call it special ed still. A lot of
Mhm.
places, a lot of teachers will still say they work with special needs kids. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very offensive term in multiple ways. And another one is that it's makes it seem as if access needs are special, like they're extra. It's something
Mhm.
that is above and beyond to like accommodate their special
Yeah.
needs, like as if it's set apart and not something that should just be implemented and automatic in everyday life. And like you said, it is a very condescending, paternalistic sort of term that
Yeah.
is really just belittling. I can't think of a more of a way to belittle a person and strip them of their personhood than calling them special needs rather than just saying disabled.
Yeah. It it has like a very separating effect too. It's like you're not like the rest of us, quote unquote normal people. You're special. You need
Hmm.
special attention and yeah, it's just like I said, it's further othering and like you said, belittling. I think that's a really good word to. describe it.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, historically, that is, you know, that classroom separation in schools and
Mm-hmm.
everything, like two different systems. It is an actual separation. So, yeah, I do hope more places start to phase that out and stop using it and realize why it's not a great term to keep using.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think the recent like rise of disabled people educating on these sort of topics like online,
Mm,
I think, I mean, I'm hoping in the long run, like, I think that's helpful in like making these changes, but like you said, it's very slow.
mm-hmm,
People are really reluctant to change the way they've done things for so many years, you know, the way they
mm-hmm.
talk, the way they think about things. It takes them a long time.
Yeah, yeah. It unfortunately does take a long time. And it's so frustrating because the term disabled, the term disability, it's like it's right there. It's so easy
Mm-hmm.
to just use it. We have a term that fits in all these different circumstances. And of course, you can just be specific if you're talking about different types of disabilities, like, you know,
Yeah.
intellectual disability, neurodevelopmental disabilities like autism, etc., psychiatric disabilities, if you're talking about like whether you use terms like mental illness or neurodivergencies,
Mm-hmm.
neurotypes, um, just be specific with what
Yeah.
you're talking about. And the terms exist. It's just that there is so much inherent negative stigma and shame and
Mm-hmm.
moralizing around disability that, again, people will avoid using those terms at all
Yeah.
costs because they do see
They
them
think
as
they're bad.
bad words. They see them as bad words, shameful things, a shameful
Mm-hmm.
existence. If you're disabled, it's shameful. It's like
Yeah.
you should be trying to hide that or conform as much as possible if you're disabled.
Yeah.
And you
And they don't want to
shouldn't,
remind you that you're
right?
disabled.
We don't want to,
Like,
and we don't want to give you license or entitlement around your disability either. So we're never going to
mm-hmm.
call you disabled. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I can't help but think back to what you said. Uh, the term, was it person with ability?
Person with ability.
Like, I think that's the worst thing I've ever heard. Like, at first I thought like differently abled is kind of on the same, like a similar
Mhm.
wavelength, but like that's just so much worse. Cause like what are they what are they even trying to say? Like, oh, don't worry, I see you as a person and you do have abilities.
Yeah.
So that's good. Like
It's,
they
it's,
don't, it's so weird.
it's the most like gaslighting, toxic positivity, like version of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, like
It's
you can
saying the
still do
exact
stuff.
opposite of disability.
You
Yeah.
can do things. Don't worry.
Yeah.
And you're so like you can do it.
Pat on the head.
Right.
Yeah. That, I'll never forget that one. I've never heard that. I hope no one ever says that to me because I would just be gobsmacked and just like, what the fuck are you even trying to say to me right now? Like, just stop. That one, it was stuck in my head as we were talking. Like, I can't believe someone actually said that. Yeah,
Yeah.
differently abled is also like, oh, you have abilities, you're just different from the rest of us. It's
Hmm.
kind of like, instead of saying special, it's different, you know? Like they're
Hmm.
using different as the adjective.
Right.
Like that's any better.
Right. It's just replacing one with the other, but it's the same attitude. It's the same
Yeah.
mentality, which is that like they need to feel non-disabled people feel really bad if they ever acknowledge that your disability actually disables you. They are
Yeah.
very uncomfortable with that fact.
Yeah. And I want to know why exactly. Like, I'm sure it's different for different people. Not everyone has the exact same perspective or understanding of disability. I wonder if it's like, obviously they're very uncomfortable with disability even existing in front of them.
Mhm.
But I think part of it is also like they think that we're uncomfortable with our disabilities.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So they don't want to bring it up or like bring attention to it, even though it's right there. Like, you see me in my wheelchair.
Mhm.
Like,
Right.
I know I'm disabled. You know I'm disabled. It's fine.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it I think it goes very deep. And I think I've thought about this a lot. And I think there's a couple things that come up for me. One is that if non-disabled people were to really, really face the fact that disabled people do actually face barriers systemically from our disabilities, and also that we are disabled in our day-to-day lives and have struggles that they don't deal with, then they would have to face the inequality. They would have to face the fact that they are benefiting from their non-disabled privilege day to day. They would have to face the fact that they maybe have even participated in that oppressive dynamic with disabled people, and that it's something that they can't reconcile because they don't want to acknowledge that. And then the second part, I think, is that they are very, very scared of thinking that disability is something that could happen to them too. That is something that I think most non-disabled people feel when looking at disabled people. And I think where a lot of this discomfort stems from and a lot of the avoidance and shame happens because they don't want to end up like us. And that is kind of it. It's always in the back of their mind unless they have done some major work around their ableism, which they probably haven't. Most people haven't. Um,
Yeah.
they they don't want to be like us, and so they can't even acknowledge the fact that we do just face different struggles and different environments and different realities in our daily lives, because then they'd have to admit that fear of becoming disabled themselves.
Yeah. They'd have to admit that fear, and they'd have to admit, like, what you're saying about the inequality.
Hmm.
Not only like that it's there, but that they don't do anything about it.
Hmm.
Because if they acknowledge that, that would make them feel bad about themselves. You know what I mean? They don't do anything to combat inaccessibility when they see it, or ableism when they see it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like, avoiding the idea of disability altogether is just way more comfortable for them. But yeah, the
Hmm.
fear of disability happening to them or their loved ones or whatever, that's also a big driver in that avoidance. If they see a disabled person and really see how limited they are, especially by society and inaccessibility and all those things, and just like how hard disability is in general, depending on what it is, like if someone's sick, they don't want to think about how hard it is because God forbid it happens to them, they're gonna have to deal with that. And like, no, it's better to just make myself believe that, yeah, there's disabled people, but they're fine. They're just different, and it's not bad. And it's like, it's whatever. They just do their own thing, and I don't have to worry about it. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
it's further gaslighting of our experiences in order for them to feel more comfortable with
Yeah.
with our existence.
Yeah, I think that cognitive dissonance of non-disabled people when it comes to disability is a huge driver for ableism of all kinds. I mean, systemic ableism, interpersonal ableism. And I lost my train of thought. But that, yeah, that the cognitive dissonance of that fear that they cannot reconcile, that they could be disabled, is really, I think, why disability is so shamed and so moralized, is
Mm-hmm.
because they need to create all of these alternative reasons or circumstances in their mind for why disability would happen to someone, rather than just the reality that disability is a natural part of human existence.
Yeah.
Accidents happen, illness happens, people, we're born this way, a lot of us,
Yeah.
for in different ways, but it disability just happens. It's a normal part of human diversity and just human life.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than facing that, they need to think of all these alternative reasons, because that's the scariest thing to them, right? Like you said, it's that thinking like it could happen to them or anyone they know at any
Yeah.
time. And that scares the shit out of them. Like that makes them shit
Yeah.
their pants with fear. So they're like, well, no, like disability is, it's different. It's something that just happens to people. Like maybe that person was a bad person. That's part of the moralizing. Like
Mm-hmm.
maybe that person did something. Maybe this person, like even the thing, like whether, and across any religion, like I've had people say things, not to me, but I've heard people say things online like maybe that person did something in a past life and now they're disabled.
Mm-hmm.
Or, and then in the Christian sense, like, oh, like you fell from God, like you're a sinner, and if you
Yeah.
like pray, like they think you can pray their disability away too. Like, oh, like
Mm-hmm.
somehow this disability is like sinful or something that can be healed in a religious sense. And
Yeah.
across different belief systems, there is this, that sort of ableist attempt at rationalizing disability itself, anything to avoid the reality, like I said.
Yeah. Like, as long as I'm not like that person, it won't happen to me. As long as
Right.
I don't sin and I eat healthy and I exercise every day and I say my prayers and blah blah blah, I'll be fine.
The health
Um,
part, yes, the
yeah.
healthism part too, because we have a very, obviously our society is very ableist, but there is this belief that if you do XYZ health things, if you exercise, if you eat well, if you do all those things, you have control over your body and your health 100%, and that you will not get disabled because you are doing quote unquote right things. Again, there's that
Yeah.
morality attached to it. That's the
Yeah.
good, right, moral thing to do, is to be healthy, take care of your body, do all those things. And then somehow you must have messed up. And that's why you're
Mhm.
disabled. And I'm fine because I do those things. When
Yeah.
that could not be further from the truth.
Yeah. They feel the need to convince themselves that they can prevent disability in their life. As long as they check off the list of all the right things to do, they can avoid it. And anyone who doesn't avoid it or does become disabled or something happens, whatever, it's their fault. Somehow,
Yep.
some way, it's their fault.
Yep.
And that can only happen to them. That can never happen to me. That's
Yeah.
the way they think about it.
Yeah. And it's, a lot of it is subconscious. They definitely don't think about it this way actively. Like they're not actively realizing, or else they would realize how fucked up it is. In their mind, they're just like thinking about it that way, but it's all subconscious. They're just like subconsciously constantly reassuring themselves that they won't end up like us. And always with the implication that the disabled person must have done something wrong. You made a mistake. You must have not been healthy, or as healthy as you thought you were. Or
Mm-hmm.
you, and they do it even after the person is disabled. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, have you tried this? Have you tried, the unsolicited advice too, thinking that,
Yeah.
well, surely they can't even face the fact that someone is really, really sick or is very, very disabled, because they just think, well, surely you can just do this. Surely you can just
Yeah,
eat
there must be
right.
something you can do about it.
Right. Like they
And you're just not doing it.
even then, even when they're faced with the fact that, like, okay, this person is irrevocably altered by their illness or disability, they still have to try to avoid that and say, like, no, there's always something to be done. There's always something that
Hmm.
can fix this person. And again, that goes back to the thinking that either the disabled person did something to deserve it, or they're not doing everything they can to get out of it. And there is this illusion that we all have control over our bodies, which
Yeah. The, the need for a sense of control definitely plays a big part of it. And it's really sad. I think it's sad for the people thinking this way, because it ends up affecting the way they treat disabled people. And then it's also like setting them up for a lot of shame and self blaming when they eventually become disabled, because if you live long enough, you're probably going to become disabled at some point, somehow. And it's sad to think all these people, yeah, they're able bodied now, and they think they're safe from disability if they do all these things. But like you said, it's a naturally occurring thing in not even just humans, like every living creature, you know, it just happens. There's no like karmic effect to it. It's not like, what you said, bad deeds from a past life or sin or because you didn't exercise enough, whatever. It just happens. And yeah, not only does it affect those people, but it also ends up becoming internalized by a lot of disabled people. Yeah, I think that's something that just happens a lot for disabled people. I think especially people who become disabled like later in life, like maybe they weren't born with a certain disability, but then they acquire it later. And they've been around all of these rationalizations and beliefs about disability that when it happens to them, it's like, oh, it's because I drank too much alcohol in college, or it's because I didn't exercise enough, or it's because I didn't go to church. And they end up just blaming themselves and thinking they could have done something different when really, like, it just happened. There's no cosmic reason why it happened to them.
yeah, I think in general, humans are very uncomfortable with anything that doesn't have a reason. I mean, why do you think we have religion? I mean, no offense to anyone who like is of any faith. But like, why do you think
We
like
just
we
lost so many listeners. I'm just kidding.
oops, oops. Sorry, I'm actually agnostic. I'm not a total atheist, but it's just like people really want there to be a reason for everything.
Yeah.
And really, it's hard for them to accept that there is not a reason for disability. It just happens, whether it's an accident or it's genetic or it's a random illness or whatever the circumstances may have been. There's so many untold ways to become disabled, and most of them are out of our control, completely out of our control. And
Yeah.
I think of something that Imani Barbarin says, the disability activist.
Hmm.
It Everyone should know. Everyone knows who she is. If you don't, look her up. But something she says in like her speeches or lectures is the only thing separating me from you is luck and time when talking to non-disabled people.
Hmm.
It's really is that simple. It's just
Yeah.
luck and time. It's random. It's the luck of the draw or unluck in our case, like we the unlucky draw, and time, because the only thing more certain than death the fact that death is a part of life. If you live, you will die. That is 100%
Yeah,
certain.
eventually.
Eventually, everyone dies. I'm sorry, this is getting very dark, but but the only thing more certain than that is disability,
Yeah.
because everyone, if you have the privilege and the luck to grow into old age, everyone will become disabled at some point. And unless you die a very tragic death, as I said, the only thing more certain is death. Unless you die a very tragic sudden death when you were like, still able-bodied and non-disabled,
Yeah.
you will become disabled. Whether you identify it that way or think about it that way, everyone will become disabled at some point in their lives if that is not the case. And, you know, the way that people see disability as inherently negative, as one of the worst things that could happen to a person, as tragic, as shameful, as something someone deserved, they cannot imagine that happening to themselves. And
Hmm.
like you said, it's really, really sad because when they do become disabled, because they will, like I
Or
said,
someone they love
or
becomes
someone they
disabled.
love, they are going to then harm themselves or their loved one with
Hmm.
that ableism. And it is
Yeah.
very harmful. Like, it's not just kind of a, like, oh, you're just treating someone kind of not great. Like, it can have devastating consequences. It can fracture and ruin relationships. It
Hmm.
can, for me, like, for example, it worsened my disability because I was one of those people in the beginning who didn't, partially because I just didn't realize what my illness was and what was happening. But I definitely had the thought, I just need to exercise more. I'll just take these
Mm.
supplements. I'll just exercise. I'll just do all the things that I've always done in the past and I'll get better. Like, I'll
Yeah.
be okay. And when I kept getting worse and worse and worse, I couldn't reconcile the fact like everything I had been told, all the health advice wasn't working because the rules had changed suddenly in my body. And I didn't realize, like,
Yeah.
oh, exercise is actually harming me. I'm getting sicker.
Yeah.
The more I try, the sicker I'm getting. And that happens a lot. People will push themselves or push their loved ones and in really harmful ways that have real world consequences. It is really,
Yeah.
really sad,
It can be dangerous.
and dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That made me think of when I first got sick. It was hard because I did have some understanding of disability and I was like learning more because I was already, I made disabled friends, like I had you. So I was like ahead of the curve in that sense. Like I
Hmm.
wasn't just spiraling into that mindset that you were just describing. But some of it did also stick to me, like in my mind, because yeah, it's like been ingrained. And I would have those feelings like I must have done something to make me susceptible to this illness. If I had only ate better food or exercised more, took more supplements, whatever, and I had to like actively fight and argue with those thoughts. And then also the thoughts of like, well, yeah, maybe I just need to try exercising, or if I just think more positively, like maybe that'll help,
Mm.
because that's also a big thing that's pushed on people once they become disabled. It's like, oh, just think positive. If you think negative, that's just going to make you worse, and it's further like shame and putting blame on the person who is disabled. And yeah, it was definitely like a tug of war for a long time between the logic I knew of
Hmm.
like this didn't happen to me because of fate or because I did something bad or whatever. Like it just happened. But it was that logic had to fight with the shame and the things that I've heard my whole life, you know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it made it harder to get to a place where I could actually really figure out and understand what's going on with me and how to take care of myself and how to help myself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Versus like how you were saying, things that will make me worse just because I've been taught to believe that's the answer to everything.
Yeah. Yeah. All the conventional non-disabled slash ableist wisdom goes out the window when you become disabled. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, wow, none of this actually applies like I thought it did.
Yeah.
And the one thing that you said that made me really think of how chronically ill people are shamed specifically is that mindset thing. It does apply to
Mm-hmm.
all disability, but I think it is really more insidious for chronic illness. Is there is an idea that you're in an illness mindset. People literally say that and call it that,
Yeah.
where they think that a person who is chronically ill stays sick because they're in a quote unquote illness mindset and they want to stay
Yeah.
sick.
They're like manifesting their illness with their negative thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. And how disgusting is that? Because you really think that anyone who is sick, anyone I know, and in myself included, like anyone who is sick, we just want to get better. We just want to not be as
Yeah.
sick or be in less pain or, have more ease and less discomfort in our daily lives, whatever that looks like. Maybe we're not even hoping for a cure or anything as magnificent as that, even though I
Yeah.
would take one in an instant if it existed. But if we're being realistic in our goals for our illnesses or whatever, or what we would in our ideal world, like there is no one I've ever met who is sick and is like, I've never encountered this so-called illness mindset. I have
Yeah.
literally never seen it.
It doesn't
It
exist.
doesn't exist. It's something that healthy people, that non-disabled people make up to think that chronically ill people are doing it to themselves, that we're doing it to
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yep. They're not trying hard enough and they're comfortable with, how they are now. It can cause a lot of shame, but it also just pisses me off.
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
like yeah, even when I'm, I feel like I've gotten better with unlearning or like not letting those things get to me as much. But there are times someone says something, it can make you feel bad, but it also just really angers me because it's like, you really think that I'm not doing everything in my power to get better? Do you think I like being in this much pain? You think I like being stuck in bed all the time? It's really infuriating and it's insulting.
Mhm.
Um,
It's
to
insulting. Yeah.
yeah, to anyone who's sick and people just thinking like it's really they just think so little of them. Like
Mhm.
not only are they not trying hard enough, they're not in a positive mindset, they're stuck in an illness mindset. They also can't think of things that would help, like vitamins and yoga and essential oils, like
Mhm.
all these ridiculous things that they just wholeheartedly believe in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's so condescending. It's so like again, belittling is going to be like a recurring
mm-hmm.
theme. But like it how entitled do you have to be to really think that a person who's chronically ill hasn't been doing everything they can for their illness and is still doing everything they can for their illness and slash illnesses, and that and there's this element of like blame and failure, like this, if you aren't doing these things they think you should be doing or they think will help even though they won't, that you're a failure. And again, it just goes back to them thinking that you've brought it upon yourself, that you somehow want to be sick, even if subconsciously. And yeah, how patronizing. Like, there are whole medical schools of thought that have been created to center around this. I mean, the whole like biopsychosocial theory of ME, where a group of psychologists continually insist that MECFS is psychological in nature, and they talk about things like illness mindset and push different therapies that they believed will help the patients if they just believe that they will get better, and don't believe in these illness mindset sort of thoughts. Whole systems of thought have developed because of this that are way more
Mm-hmm.
accepted than they should be. And it's
Yeah.
not, we're not, when we're talking about these things, we're not just talking about like interpersonal ableism, although that's part of it, where
Yeah.
we do encounter people that say these things to us or other disabled people, but it's systemic as well. This
Mm-hmm.
sort of thinking is not just casual ableism in your day-to-day, life. And by casual, I just mean not systemic. It
Mm-hmm.
is systemic,
Yeah.
formalized
It's
thinking.
embedded in just the way society works and is
Right.
set up.
Right. Like even in our medical system, everywhere, it just bleeds into everything. And yeah, that's how insidious it is. That's why it's so hard to undo and to tackle, because it is so widespread.
Yeah, it's been going on for so long. I was just thinking about how. Oh, hold on, I'm getting brain fog. Words. Yeah, it was. Sorry. It was going back to when what you're saying about how chronically ill people specifically are shamed and blamed. It made me think about not only are chronically ill people shamed when they are trying their best to get better or just find a treatment that works for them or therapy that works for them, whatever. I feel like it's even more so when chronically ill people get to a point where they can't try anymore,
Mm.
or they get to a point where I guess acceptance, like these things, these illnesses I have, there are no known cures. So
Mm-hmm.
me chasing cures is only doing me harm right now. And that's very valid, like,
Mm-hmm.
place to get to. Like, I've gotten there. I've been in that place many times where I can't try anymore. I can't do any more tests right now. It's just, I need to just be. Um, and that is really looked down upon from able-bodied people.
Yeah.
Obviously, they can't understand it, but yeah, I was just thinking back to the things that I have heard when trying to explain my illnesses to people, especially family members, and they're, coming up with all these things like, oh, have you tried this? Have you tried that? You just need to do this. Oh, you'll beat this. Stay
Mm-hmm.
positive, whatever. And I just have to be like, no, I won't actually.
Mm-hmm.
There's no cure for this. I just have to find ways to make it as manageable as possible. And for certain things, like, that's really hard to do. Instead of understanding that reasoning and like, oh yeah, that makes sense, no. They refuse to accept that nothing can be done for certain disabilities or illnesses. And I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, yeah. I think it goes back to that fear and that need for control. They really want to believe, as sick as you can get, there's always something to be done. Or maybe you're not even that sick. Maybe you're just kind of sick, and there's still nothing that can be done. Because, like you said,
Yeah.
a lot of illnesses don't have a cure. Not just
Yeah.
ME, which we have, and our other comorbidities. Like none of the
Yeah.
illnesses that I have are curable.
Even the
Um,
more mild ones, quote
yeah,
unquote mild ones.
yeah.
Yeah.
Even my least disabling diagnoses are still not curable. And just in general, a lot of illnesses have, maybe they
Yeah.
have more treatments and stuff than for ME. There's not even really treatments. There's only symptom
Yeah.
management. The treatments, quote unquote, are just symptom management.
Yeah.
And yeah, they really are so terrified to think that you could just get to a place where you have to accept that you can't keep chasing all that stuff, because
Yeah.
that is, first of all, it's very time consuming, it's exhausting, you can burn out very quickly. And if you're someone like us who has an illness that does not have a cure or even treatments, really, like, there is only so much you can do. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
uh, aside from maybe trying to get into one of the only specialty clinics that exist and traveling the world and trying very risky, might I add, experimental cutting edge treatments for the disease, which not everyone can do or afford and is exorbitantly expensive.
Yeah.
Like, there really isn't a lot you can do aside from just making yourself comfortable. And they can't accept that. They really can't accept that. Again, it goes back to the fact that really the entire thing is out of our control, and that, yeah, there isn't just a magical person you can go see to fix. There is no one specialist. There is no doctor. There is no random
Yeah.
cure that is just gonna, at least right now, not until medicine advances, that is
Mm-hmm.
gonna help us. So,
Yeah. They can't fathom it until it happens to them. And maybe not even then.
and maybe not even then, because, yeah, like you said, people can't even accept it when they get disabled or they get sick, and to their detriment. And it ends up really harming them.
My mind is so blank right now.
I'm like
It's like a blank piece of paper in here.
nothing going on in there.
That last hit, it was too much.
That's really
As soon as I took it, I was just like, whoa.
thoughts gone.
Thoughts are gone. You have thoughts though.
I have the opposite problem. I have like five
Too
different ways
many.
this conversation could go, and I'm not sure
Mm,
there's enough time for any of them. But I was just thinking about how I think this also connects to medical gaslighting, because, like I was saying earlier, it's not just people in our lives interpersonally that think these kinds of things, even doctors. I mean, really,
yeah.
doctors are some of the most ableist people I've ever met.
They're some of the worst.
Yeah, even doctors, so many of them are so uncomfortable with the thought that they can't help a patient because it's at the limits of their knowledge or their experience, or at the limits of medicine as a whole, like the technology we have that exists today. This person may be beyond their help. And rather than admit that and admit that they have limitations, a lot of them
Mhm.
resort to gaslighting.
That's a really good point. Again, my my mind is blank. I can't put sentences together. Give me a second. Oh, okay, wait. It's coming. It's just my brain's buffering.
Let it percolate.
Yeah. Okay, hold on. I have to backtrack. You were talking about medical gaslighting, and yeah, doctors can't admit their limitations when it comes to helping patients, so instead they turn to gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely something that happens like way more often than I think people realize, especially
Mm-hmm.
non-disabled people. And it's something like it's so pervasive, but it can also be kind of subtle at times.
Yeah.
And even when it's not subtle, when it's like bold faced
Mhm.
gaslighting, it's still, it can be really hard to recognize it for yourself. And that's how the gaslighting can become internalized or even like,
Mhm.
repeated to other people. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about gaslighting in general, right? Is being presented with two separate realities. The person who's gaslighting you really fully believes in one reality, or they're manipulating you to believe in one reality. And you know a different reality. You have a different
Mm-hmm.
lived experience and reality that is completely at odds. And so I think it gaslighting, including medical gaslighting, can be so tricky in that way because the doctor again could just be thinking and fully believing, just like anyone else, this person isn't doing enough to help their illness. They're not doing enough to get better. Are you sure it's not just stress? Are you sure you aren't just depressed? Like, really, have you really thought about how much you're doing in your life? Are you going outside every day? And they fully believe that, oh, this person, if they were just doing these things, really, they don't even see it. Oh, look, poor thing. They don't even see how misguided they are about their own health issues. They don't have any of the serious stuff going on or things that I'm not knowledgeable about. They're really just dealing with some issue that's like easily explainable and can be like easily treated. And then they like prescribe you some Xanax or antidepressants and send you on your way. Which is not to say
Yeah.
anxiety or depression are easily treatable or to minimize them. It's just that is a frequent tool of gaslighting, is to like psychologize physical health issues. And then even if you do have a psychological disability and you're dealing with something serious, even then that's still minimized by health professionals and they think it's just
Yeah.
manageable.
Yeah. First, I have some thoughts, but I'm glad that you kind of went over what gaslighting is, because as we were talking about it, I was like, I know there's a lot of people who don't understand what gaslighting is, or they confuse it with something else. So yeah, I'm glad you went over that. And it's become like a, what's the term? A buzzword, kind of.
Yeah.
It's like way overused now.
Pop psychology has really done a number with the word gaslighting and it's really
Yeah.
misused.
But yeah, I was thinking that as you were talking. And it just makes me see more how, despite all the technological and medical advances that we have made as humans, it just goes to show like how still like backwards the system is and how flawed it is when even the people who are supposed to be the experts or the specialists in certain things, certain illnesses, disabilities, whatever, they're the ones harming the patients with their ableism, with their gaslighting, with their shaming. Like, I don't know. It's just really thinking about it. It's just like, how did we get here? What the fuck is going on? Why is it like this? And why are there so many people who can't see why this is fucked? you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to talk about the history so much, but we don't have time to get into it.
I know.
But things like medical misogyny and the history of that, terms like hysteria were still being used in the 70s. That's not that long ago. That was only like 50
Mm-hmm.
years ago. And there are illnesses that not that long ago were thought of as psychogenic in nature, psychosomatic, that were thought to be, I mean, asthma was one of them. MS, before MRIs were invented, was also thought of that way. And there's countless examples. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. Basically,
Yeah.
any diagnosis you think of today, at one point, there was some completely backwards, awful, terrible theory about the illness, and people with that diagnosis or illness were treated terribly. by the medical establishment. And that was accepted. That was accepted. I mean, looking at one example from the history of ME is that different cluster outbreaks of ME were being described as mass hysteria as recent as the 70s. And those papers have never been retracted. All of this stuff just ties directly from the history of medicine, which as a field has some very horrific origins. And I actually mean that in every sense of the word. Like,
Yeah.
horrors beyond our comprehension have been committed
Yeah.
by the medical establishment and are still being committed all the time. And the opposite moralization kind of happens with medicine, where while disability and disabled people are seen as like morally bad or whatever, doctors in the medical establishment are uplifted as morally good, inherently good, completely absolved of any wrongdoing or guilt. And it's
They're
like,
saints.
why do you think that the Hippocratic Oath includes the phrase, first do no harm?
Mm-hmm.
Because they did a shit ton of harm to the point
Yeah.
that they had to make every single person who gets that medical license take a fucking oath that says, first do no harm, and continually remind themselves of that. And they like to say that all the time, but it still happens. It still happens. Like,
Yeah.
medical misogyny still exists, medical racism still exists, medical inequality persists to this day along, gender lines, class lines, race lines, along all of the marginalizations a human could have. And yeah, that all trickles down into that medical gaslighting that occurs. And again, that doctors believe their word is law. They think their assessment is always correct. And the other thing I wanted to mention was it takes 17 years for any medical research to be implemented into medical practice. This is not just a random number, this is an actual statistic they've done from researching how medical innovations get implemented. It takes 17 years on average
Well,
before in medical practice that doctors actually begin to know about that, implement that,
yeah.
have any sort of competency around that research.
That is scary. Like, it
Right?
takes that long on average. It could take even longer. Jesus.
So
Yeah.
we're operating with 2007 medical knowledge
Stop. Oh my
today.
God. Wow. That
Yeah.
makes me wonder, like, how medicine will be 17 years from now. I wonder.
Hopefully much improved, but
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, all of this is making me, like, philosophical. I can't help but think. I don't know. We're talking about all these things. I'm hearing you talk about all of this, and I don't know. I just can't help but think that it seems like almost human nature to see the worst in people or blame them for the things that go wrong in their life.
Mm,
And I'm just like, why do we do that? Why? Because it's not just with health things, it's like everything. I don't know. I feel like as people, we're just so quick to put blame on someone for their traumas or their problems or whatever. And yeah, I was trying to think of like why that is, and I think it just ties back to what we were saying in the beginning. It's fear and the need to convince ourselves that we're safe from something like disability. And yeah,
yeah.
it's really messed up. It's caused so many issues and, like I said, horrific things that have been done and are done to disabled people. And it's really sad, but I'm trying to think that like I think things can get better. I hope they get better. And I
Yeah.
think these kind of conversations can be part of it. Because when things go unsaid or unspoken, that's how these things just keep being repeated for
Mm-hmm.
decades on end, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, discussing things in depth, like medical gaslighting and all those things. I don't know. I'm hoping that it broadens someone's mindset or perspective, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that could lead to something changing. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that all makes sense. I think that definitely things they have to be identified. The problems have to be identified before they can be fixed, and things have to be brought out into the open before any transformation or change is going to happen, whether it's like at the individual level or the societal level. And a big part of it too, like not to get too deep into it, but it is the culture and history of white supremacy and
Mm-hmm.
Christianity, because there is, along with the thinking of white supremacy, is this exceptionalism, that the similar moralization along race that comes along with white supremacy kind of mirrors the moralization sort of grafted onto disability. So, like, whiteness is goodness, like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And also, a lot of the historically, a lot of the ableist things or thoughts are perpetuated around disability also come from Christianity, which the forces of Christianity have really propelled white
Yeah.
supremacy. But like the thinking that chronically ill people or disabled people were possessed by demons and things like
Oh my
that. Like that
god.
was actually at
Yeah.
one point in history, that was the thinking.
Yeah.
And a lot of this comes from that, you know, the thinking that you did something bad, you somehow did
Mm-hmm.
something to let the demon in your body. As absurd and ridiculous as it is to say it that way now, that is where a lot of this comes from. And yeah, it just is so pervasive. And with the history of colonialism and everything, ableism was used as a source of control for enslaved people, as a way
Mm-hmm.
to enforce that oppression. If they are disabled, you know, they're less likely to run away. If you make up reasons and psychologize the need to be quote unquote a free person, then you can
Mm-hmm.
control those people. And not to quote Imani twice in one episode, but something
We
that
love him, Ani.
we love Imani. Something that Imani says is, if white supremacy is like the framework, then ableism is the tool.
Mm.
Ableism is the tool, and a lot of times, for the way that a lot of these oppressive forces are actually put into place. It is the way that they are actually enforced and controlled. Again, another example of the history of hysteria. Male doctors actually thought that a woman's womb was like wandering around outside her body, and that was causing hysterical notions.
What?
Did you know that?
No. What does that? What?
They actually thought like literally that the womb was prone to just leaving the woman's body, and just
Like the literal
the
uterus.
literal uterus, the literal womb, which they didn't even know it was like actually, they didn't even know like any of the
What?
anatomy really, but
Yeah.
the womb, they were like, the womb, it wanders outside of the body, and this is what gives women these, you know, hysterical thoughts and actions and feelings, and why they're so emotional, and why, and you know, any sort of like ill humor, quote unquote, is like that was a term that was used, or any like malady that was plaguing a
Yeah.
woman, even if it was actually like a physical illness or what, it didn't matter whether it was psychological, physical. They're like, it's all hysteria. It's just they're
Wow.
hysterical.
Sounds like those doctors were hysterical.
No, really, like
Your womb is wandering around.
they literally thought an organ of the human body would detach and wander around
I'm
outside.
picturing a uterus with like little legs and it's like walking around.
Yeah. And even when
Oh
they
my
knew
god.
that wasn't the case, they still kept hysteria
Yeah.
until the last century
Because it worked for them.
because it worked for them, exactly, as a system of control, as a way to control people and to get them in line. And yeah, it's messed up.
Oof. Yeah. All these things are connected.
It's all
It's wild to like
connected.
actually. I feel like we could have one of those boards with a bunch of string just connecting
Yeah.
different points together. And yeah, that's why it's so vital that we need to dismantle these things because it affects everyone. And it has been affecting everyone in different ways, even people who aren't disabled.
Yeah. All of the systems of oppression are connected. Our struggle is inherently tied with all other struggles. And yeah, this is why I think disability justice is really important, and realizing that, you know, cross movement organizing and solidarity is very important. And it has to include being anti-ableist, and any disability movement has to include other movements for I just lost the word. Oh my god, what is the word for, like, freedom, movements for, but
Liberation?
yes, liberation. Any movement for liberation. We has to include all the other ones. And yeah, why couldn't I think of the word
Yeah.
liberation? I was like, what? All I can think of is oppression. Oh, where's the liberation? And yeah, it affects non-disabled people too. Ableism as a system of oppression, if it affects all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most non-disabled people would think that it doesn't affect them,
Yeah.
even though it does.
Until it starts to be pointed out to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it really affects them when they eventually become disabled.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know what else to say. I don't know how I want to like close this.
I was thinking we need to bring it back to shame, because
Yeah.
the bottom line is that all of these systemic sources of ableism trickle down to affect disabled people, and we are shamed in all of these different ways. It comes from all of these different sources in our lives, and then it makes it harder for us to just live and accept our disabilities and make the best life we can for ourselves.
Yeah. It makes life so much harder when life is already really fucking hard.
Yeah. Like, we already have to deal with our illnesses and our disabilities and access issues and inaccessibility. And then we are shamed, whether overtly or covertly, by all these different people in our lives. And that affects us psychologically. It affects us a lot. I mean,
Physically too.
and then yeah, and then physically as well. It just is not okay. Not okay.
It's not okay.
It's not okay.
To say the
To
least.
say the least, it's really fucked up that disabled people are treated in these ways. And yeah, we just absorb it. And
Mm-hmm.
it takes a lot of undoing and unlearning to try to counteract these things. And it's continuous because the
Yeah.
shaming is continuous.
Yeah. And we don't deserve it.
No.
We don't deserve that shame to be placed on us for things out of our control.
Yeah.
And I don't know what else I want to say. I feel like I need a sentence to say to close my thoughts, but I don't know what it is.
No. And this, back to what you were saying, like, I hope it gets better. I think it will only get better once non disabled people start caring about ableism and start
Mm-hmm.
unlearning this themselves before they become disabled and
Yeah.
realizing how it affects them as well and how it makes things worse for all of us, really, especially disabled people, but also them. And
Yeah.
most people don't even care to challenge their ableist thinking.
Yeah. I do want to say that non disabled people thinking this way about disability, like you said, it'll only get better if they themselves challenge those ways of thinking and change them. And it's not up to us as disabled people to like
Yeah.
enlighten them or educate them. Yeah, some of us, take it upon ourselves because that's what we want to do, but it's not our responsibility. And it makes me think of like when I first got sick, like I wanted so desperately for the people around me to understand as much as I do and not think those things, like inadvertently shaming me and all these things. And sometimes I feel like I had to be the one to teach them, but really the most important thing that I can do is focus on myself and not only taking care of myself physically, but challenging those thoughts within my own belief system. And yeah, just figuring out how to treat myself the way I deserve to be treated. And that includes not shaming myself or believing anyone else who's shaming me about my disabilities and things out of my control.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes a lot of inner work to get to that point to where we can say, this is not mine to hold. This is someone else's. This is society's problem. And this is not me, and this is not does not define me or my experiences. And yes, it is not all on us as disabled people, and so much work needs to be done by
Mm-hmm.
non-disabled people to start educating themselves on these things. And like you said, seeking out sources that are willing participants
Mm-hmm.
in that education, and not just
Yeah.
making the nearest disabled person in your life educate you if they are not
Mm-hmm.
willing. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and I think things will change over time, and they have already changed a lot, but there's still so much that needs to happen to get us to where we
Yeah.
need to be.
We'll see how we are 17 years from now.
Right. Let's wait 17 years.
Check back in.
Yeah, we'll report back.
Thanks so much for listening and being here. And a big thank you to our one patron on Patreon, Moon. We appreciate you. And if you haven't checked out our Patreon already, we'll have a lot of benefits on there, bonus episodes. You can get access to episodes early, and yeah, other things. So check it out.
If you want to do us a huge favor, you can give us a review on Apple Podcasts. Those make a huge difference in the podcast stats and how you are promoted. So yes, please, please, please leave us a review if you are able. If you listen on that platform, it would help us out a lot.
Yeah. Only if you like it, though.
Oh yeah, only if you like it. If you
Only if you
don't,
like it.
if you don't like it,
No negative reviews, please.
yeah, just don't.
Yeah. Or if you listen on Spotify, you can leave us a rating. And you can also leave us comments under episodes that you listen to. So
Yeah,
that can count as reviews.
yeah, that would be really rad. Go do it. This has been From the Sickbed. Thank you for joining us in sickness and solidarity. You can find us at From the Sickbed on Instagram, YouTube, and Substack. Support us by sending us tips on Ko-fi. Take care and talk to you next time.